She was a single mother with 2 children. He was a mafia boss. What he did for her shocked the world. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the like button. It's a small gesture with a big impact. And share with me, where are you listening from? The rain had become a lullaby, cruel and constant, each drop slicing the air like a warning. It fell heavy against the sidewalk, soaking the frayed edges of my coat, slipping beneath the thin soles of my shoes, whispering that I didn't belong anywhere. My children curled into me, their breath shallow against my ribs, their small bodies trembling with a cold that no embrace could silence. My lips cracked when I tried to hum for them, an old lullaby I barely remembered. I couldn't recall the words, only the ache, and still I held on, because that's what mothers do, even when everything inside them begs to disappear. I closed my eyes against the streetlight's sting, against the cars that passed without slowing. I wasn't sure when I last slept, or ate. The world had turned grey, a blur of sharp glances and locked doors. I stopped hoping someone would see me. I stopped needing to be seen. Then the black car stopped. It made no sound as it rolled near, its tires humming low over the wet asphalt like a secret. I didn't look up. I was too tired for another threat, too numb for pity. But I felt it, that shift in the air, when someone powerful steps into the world, like gravity tightening, like breath stalling in your chest. A door opened, footsteps, slow, precise, each one louder than thunder. I finally lifted my gaze. He stood in the rain like it had no permission to touch him. Tall, black suit, sharp lines, eyes that saw everything and offered nothing. A stranger carved in shadow. He looked at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. There was no mercy in his face, only silence. And then a single movement. He knelt. I flinched when he reached for me, but his hands didn't hurt. They lifted, steady, certain, as if I weighed nothing, as if he'd done this before. My children clung to my coat, silent as ghosts. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He simply nodded toward the car, and something in me, something long buried, said yes, without words, without understanding. Inside, it was warm, too warm. My skin burned under the sudden kindness of heat. The seats were soft, too soft. I sank into them like a woman drowning backward into a dream she didn't trust. He wrapped blankets around my children, one by one, tucked them in with careful fingers, and then his eyes returned to mine. I didn't thank him. I couldn't. My gratitude was buried under exhaustion, under suspicion, under years of being taught that kindness always came with chains. But he didn't ask for gratitude. He just watched, as if learning something from the way I breathed. The car moved. We drove through the city without a word, the windows blurred with rain. The silence between us was alive, breathing, pulsing, growing teeth. Still, I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't ask who he was. It was easier to imagine this wasn't real, that the heat, the leather, the absence of cold were a dream. When we stopped, I barely recognized the world outside. Gates, stone walls, trees that bent under the weight of secrets. He stepped out first. I followed only when he reached back for one of the children. My arms ached, but I held the other. My legs moved on instinct. The mansion rose before us like a monument to something unspeakable. It wasn't beautiful, it was powerful. It whispered that time didn't matter here, that nothing ever left once it entered. He opened the door. Inside, silence, heavy, absolute, the kind that makes you forget your own name, the kind that knows things you don't want to remember. Lights flickered on, low and warm. He led me down a corridor without touching me again. The children were already half asleep in his arms. He stopped before a room. The bed was too white, the sheets too soft, the pillows untouched. He laid the children down with a grace I hadn't expected from a man like him. Then he turned to me and held out a glass of water. I stared. My fingers shook when I reached for it. When our skin touched, my breath hitched. Not from fear, from something else, something old, something I'd forgotten how to name. I drank, slowly. He stayed, Not looming, not demanding, just there. And then he left. I didn't sleep. I lay beside my children and stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the perfect paint. My body wouldn't let go. My mind kept asking questions I couldn't form. Who was he? Why did he stop? What did he want? But mostly, why did it feel like I was safe? Sometime before dawn, I rose, quiet, barefoot. I slipped through the door and into the hallway. The house was endless. Every turn opened into another corridor, another shadow, another secret. I found a staircase. I followed it, down, then sideways. I found him. He was standing by a window watching the rain. His back was a silhouette carved in stillness. When he spoke, his voice was low, unexpected. "They're sleeping well." I didn't respond. "You were going to die out there," he said. "They would have watched you fade." My throat tightened. "Why did you stop?" He turned, slowly, met my eyes, and for a second I saw it, the grief he kept buried in bone. Because I couldn't keep walking, that was all. He didn't move closer. He didn't offer comfort, just truth, raw, unpolished. It hit deeper than I expected, because I believed him. I believed that somewhere behind the iron and stone, this man had seen something in me he couldn't ignore. We didn't speak again that night. I returned to the room before the cold crept back. I curled between my children, and for the first time in what felt like years, I allowed my eyes to close, not because I was giving up, but because for a few hours I no longer had to fight. I didn't know what morning would bring, but I knew this. Something had shifted, not in the world, in me. And it terrified me. The first thing I noticed was the scent, not the warmth of the sheets or the silence of the room, but the way the air smelled, clean, soft, touched with something floral and expensive. Jasmine, maybe, or something meant to feel like peace. For a long moment, I didn't open my eyes. I stayed there, curled between my children, trying to remember what it felt like to exist without fear. The bed beneath me was too generous, the pillow too forgiving. It felt like betrayal, letting my body relax, even for a breath. I'd spent so many nights on concrete, with nothing but my own body as a shield. My children curled into my spine like roots. And now this, the echo of luxury brushing against my skin. It made me flinch. Slowly, carefully, I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was pale, high, carved with subtle patterns that danced in the early light. The curtains filtered the sun in quiet streams, not bright enough to blind, not weak enough to hide. Beside me, Lucas and Amelia were still asleep, their faces soft, their small hands tangled together. It didn't look real. Their chests rose and fell in perfect rhythm, as if nothing had ever touched them, as if they hadn't lived through the same hunger, the same streets, the same nights. I sat up. My feet met warm wood, not cold tile. Someone had thought of that. Someone had lit the room in a way that didn't scream. Someone had prepared this space for our presence, for mine. I moved slowly, not out of pain, but disbelief. On the armchair, a dress was folded, simple, cotton, ivory, clean, not new but chosen. A note rested beside it, but there were no words, only a small pressed flower tucked into the fabric. I stared at it for longer than necessary, as if it could explain something he hadn't. The hallway outside the room was hushed, like a cathedral left waiting. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt poised, like something listening. The floor didn't creak beneath me. The walls were lined with framed paintings, each one older than memory, their eyes following. As I walked, I kept expecting the spell to break, for the lights to go out, for a voice to shout that it had all been a mistake, but nothing came. Only the scent of coffee threading through the stillness, pulling me forward like a promise. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw him. He was standing in the kitchen, his back to me, pouring coffee into 2 porcelain cups. He wore a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, collar undone. There was no noise, not even from the spoon he used to stir the sugar. Every movement was deliberate, silent, as if he had spent years learning how not to disturb the air around him. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Your children are still sleeping. I thought you might want something warm." His voice didn't ask. It stated, as if he already knew I was there, as if he could feel me the same way I felt him, even across a room. I didn't answer right away. My body was caught between instinct and something deeper, something tender I didn't trust. He turned then, slowly. His eyes found mine like they'd been waiting, storm-colored, calm and violent at once. And when he looked at me, really looked, it felt like my skin forgot how to hide. He didn't smile, he didn't pretend, he just offered the cup. I walked forward, almost against my will, and sat down in the chair he pulled out for me. He placed the cup in front of me, steam curling upward like breath. I wrapped my hands around it. It wasn't the warmth I needed. It was the ritual, the recognition, the proof that someone saw me as more than survival. "Thank you," I murmured. My voice sounded foreign, fragile. He nodded barely, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I didn't do it out of charity. I did it because I wanted to." The words didn't fit him. They felt too human, too soft for someone who looked like power had carved him from smoke and silence. I studied him from behind the rim of my cup, the sharp line of his jaw, the scar that ran along the edge of his mouth like punctuation. He didn't move like a man used to tenderness. He moved like a weapon, and still there was something in the way he stood, something waiting. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Outside the city," he said. "In my house. And who are you?" I let the question fall between us like a blade. He didn't flinch. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the edge of the table. "Someone who's done terrible things," he said. "But last night, I was just a man who couldn't let you die." He said it without drama, without expectation. And yet the words lodged inside me like a match waiting for flame. I looked away, swallowed the knot in my throat. "I don't want your pity." He nodded again, not offended, just listening. "I'm not offering it," he said. "You're here because you and your children deserve to breathe. Nothing more. What you do after that is up to you." The silence that followed was thick but not cruel. He didn't rush to fill it. He just stood, took his cup and walked to the window, as if the conversation was over, or maybe as if he knew I needed time to understand that it had only just begun. I watched his back, the way his shoulders carried things no one could see, the way his presence filled the room without force. Something about him felt old, not in years, in weight, like he had lived 1,000 lives and was still carrying the bones of each one. I finished the coffee in silence. Then he said without turning, "Come with me." He didn't wait for an answer. I followed. We walked through a hall filled with stained glass, soft light painting the floors. At the end, he pushed open a glass door, and there, like a secret world, was the garden. Lucas and Amelia were running barefoot on the grass, laughing, dressed in pajamas I didn't recognize. Their joy was so pure it broke something in me. How had I not heard them wake? How had I not known? I turned to him, stunned. He didn't smile. He simply watched them, his hands tucked in his pockets. "They woke early," he said. "They were hungry. I took them to the kitchen. Amelia told me she wants to be an astronaut." I stared at him, mouth open. "And you listened," I whispered. He nodded. "I'm not used to children, but they speak in a way that tears down walls." I stepped closer to the glass, my hands trembling. The sunlight caught the edge of Amelia's hair. Lucas turned and waved. My heart cracked. I wasn't falling, I was being found, and that was far more dangerous. The first time I stepped outside that house into the morning light, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like stepping onto a stage built for someone else. The air was too still, the grass too green, the silence too rehearsed. But my children were laughing, their bare feet chasing sunlight, their voices spilling like music I hadn't heard in years. And he, Dante, stood not far, watching them like a man studying fire. I don't know what surprised me more, that he hadn't interrupted their joy, or that he knew exactly when to stay invisible. There was something about him that didn't need movement to command attention. He could stand still, and make the world listen. I stayed near the glass door, afraid to disturb it, afraid that one wrong step would unravel everything. But he turned to me then, not with a smile, not with expectation, just the soft tilt of his head, a quiet acknowledgement that I was there, that I was real. And in that moment, I felt seen in a way that didn't burn. Later, in a room filled with tall windows and soft furniture that looked untouched by time, he sat across from me while I held a cup of tea I didn't ask for. Lucas and Amelia played nearby, their laughter echoing off the marble as if they'd already forgotten the cold of the streets, as if their little bodies knew how to adapt to safety faster than I could. He watched them, then turned to me, and for a second I thought he was about to ask something simple, something ordinary, but what he said was not that. I want to be clear about a few things. His voice didn't rise, it didn't threaten, but it filled the room like a tide rising over stone. I didn't answer. I just waited. This house is not a boarding shelter. There are rules. I nodded slowly, my fingers tightening around the ceramic. I had lived under rules before, most of them carved into my skin. You don't go outside the property without someone I trust. You don't speak to my men unless I introduce you. You don't open locked doors. And most importantly, his eyes met mine, calm and unflinching. You never say my name outside these walls. There was something in the way he said it that pressed against my ribs. Not fear, not warning, just truth, like he'd lived with that name like a loaded weapon for too long. I nodded again, unsure if I was agreeing or surrendering. And if I break one, I asked, barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Then we have a problem. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't a threat. It was gravity. It was the way his world held together, by silence, by caution, by lines drawn in blood. And somehow he'd invited me into it, not as a prisoner, not as a possession, but as something he didn't yet know what to call. That night, I found myself wandering through the halls again, after the children had fallen asleep, after the house had quieted into its strange kind of peace. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't brave enough to name it that. I was just breathing differently, slower, deeper, like my lungs were finally remembering how not to tremble. I found him near the terrace, standing under a ceiling of stars, smoking something that smelled like ash and memory. His shoulders were relaxed, his eyes lost somewhere beyond the trees. He didn't turn when I approached. He didn't need to. I think he already knew I was there. I stopped a few feet away, not wanting to break the silence he wore like armor. But then he spoke. "You're not what I expected." I didn't ask what he'd expected. I just said, "Neither are you." He took another slow drag, then crushed the end beneath his boot. When he looked at me, his eyes were softer. Still unreadable, still layered in shadows, but less guarded. They look at me like I'm not a monster. His voice wasn't made for confessions. It cracked against the night like something unfinished. "They don't know what you are," I said gently. He stepped closer then, just enough, just until I could see the line where the night ended and his body began. His presence was overwhelming but not aggressive. It was the kind of power that didn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that made you want to lean closer, just to feel the pull. "And you?" he asked. I didn't answer, not with words. I held his gaze until it hurt to breathe, until my chest felt too full of things I couldn't say. I wasn't afraid of him. Not in the way I had been afraid of other men, not in the way I had learned to flinch at movement, at kindness disguised as danger. No, Dante was something else, something carved from fire and silence. A man who had bled for power and now looked tired of its taste. He reached out then, not to touch me, just to close the distance. His hand hovered near mine, and I felt it. Heat, intention, hesitation. He wasn't asking for permission. He was offering a choice. I took it. My fingers brushed against his, slow and deliberate. The contact was barely there, but my whole body reacted. It was like being touched by thunder held in velvet, every nerve aware, every breath suddenly fragile. His eyes never left mine, and in that silence something passed between us. Not desire, not yet. Something older. Recognition, maybe, like two ghosts realizing they'd once belonged to the same sorrow. He let go first. No words, just that same quiet nod, that same retreat into himself. I stood there a moment longer, feeling the absence of his touch like a brand, before turning back toward the hallway. But before I reached the stairs, I heard his voice. "I don't know what this is." I stopped. "But I don't want it to end before I understand it." I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept walking, my hands trembling, my heart louder than the silence behind me. And that night, when I crawled into bed beside my sleeping children, I didn't cry. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, I didn't cry. Because something inside me had shifted, not healed, not yet, but awakened. Something that hadn't breathed in years. Hope. I wandered the house like it might breathe if I listened closely enough. It was too quiet, but not the kind of quiet that offered peace. It was the quiet that watched, that waited, that remembered things too dark to speak aloud. The walls didn't creak. The air didn't shift. Everything felt suspended, like time had chosen this place to pause and hold its breath. I moved slowly, barefoot, wrapped in a robe that wasn't mine but smelled of something soft and unfamiliar. The children were sleeping upstairs, their bodies finally at rest, their dreams untouched by the ghosts that haunted me. And still, I couldn't sleep. My body had learned to wake at every sound, to flinch at the smallest shift in light, to move before the danger arrived. And here, in this impossible silence, I found no safety in stillness. The hallway turned sharply into a darker corridor, less polished than the others. The light from the sconces here flickered, casting long shadows along the panelled walls. The paintings were gone, no flowers in vases, no signs of life, just a long stretch of space that felt colder the farther I went. My breath slowed, my steps followed. I wasn't looking for anything, and yet my hand lifted, as if drawn by something older than choice, older than thought. At the end of the corridor, two tall doors stood closed, not like the others in the house. These were heavier, darker, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and they were locked, not with one, but two gleaming iron bolts. Something in my stomach twisted. Not fear, not yet. Something deeper, like a memory I hadn't lived, trying to surface. I touched the door. The wood was cool beneath my palm, smooth and still, and for a heartbeat, it felt like it exhaled, a pulse under my fingers, a warning. I drew my hand back, breath catching in my throat, just as I heard the steps, slow, deliberate, each one a soft command against the floor. I turned before I saw him, but I already knew. He was at the end of the hall, dressed in black again, barefoot, hair still damp from a shower, hands behind his back, like he was trying not to reach for anything. "Dante." He said nothing at first, just walked toward me with the kind of calm that unnerves more than any scream. When he stopped in front of the door, he didn't look at it. He looked at me. "That door doesn't open," he said, low and quiet. I held his gaze. "What's behind it?" He tilted his head slightly, not angry, not cold, just deliberate. "Shadows," he answered. "Stories you don't need to know." His voice didn't tremble, but mine wanted to. "Is it your darkest secret?" He didn't blink. "It's part of me, like your scars are part of you." The hallway felt smaller now, the silence closer, as if the walls wanted to listen more than they wanted to hold. I nodded slowly, fingers still tingling from the door. "Does it scare you?" I asked, "that I might see what you are?" His eyes darkened, but not in anger, in something far more intimate. He stepped closer, one step, then another, until I could feel the weight of him in the space between us. "It scares me," he said almost inaudibly, "that you'll see what I used to be, and still choose to stay." There it was. The truth that clung to his voice like mist, the unspoken need, the vulnerability wrapped in steel. I didn't step back, I didn't look away. My chest rose with the weight of breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and I said nothing, because there was nothing to fix, nothing to soothe, only the ache between two people who had never known gentleness without consequence. He stepped closer again, and this time he lifted his hand. Not to touch the door, to touch me. His fingertips hovered near my cheek, the air between us thick with the heat of everything we hadn't said. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I waited, and when his fingers brushed against my skin, it was so soft I almost doubted it happened. His hand dropped a second later, the contact gone, but the electricity remained. He looked away, jaw tight, voice a breath against the quiet. "If I open that door," he murmured, "I can't close what comes out." I swallowed. I don't want to go in. I just wanted to see how far this house goes. And you. He met my eyes again, and I saw something there, not a crack, a question, one he didn't know how to ask. He offered his hand then, slow and steady, not as a demand, as a bridge. I hesitated. Then I took it. His palm was warm, steady, solid. He led me back down the hall, away from the door, away from the silence, without looking back. I followed because I wanted to, because something in his presence made the world less sharp, less cruel, even if only for a moment. When we reached the main room again, he let go of my hand. No drama, no explanation, just distance. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the man, not the myth, not the shadows, not the silence, just him. And maybe that's why I asked what I did. "Why did you let me stay?" He turned slowly, like he was choosing how much of himself to show. "Because your silence made noise inside me," he said, "and your children looked at me like I wasn't a monster." My throat tightened. My chest ached. The answer came from some place I didn't expect. "Are you?" I whispered. He paused. I was. And in that one word, was, there were years of darkness, of violence, of hands that hurt instead of held, but also a fracture, a single delicate crack where light might seep through. I walked away before I could say something stupid, something soft, something too real. Upstairs, I found my children curled together, limbs tangled, faces pressed into pillows. I lay between them, careful not to wake their peace, and stared at the ceiling again. The silence was no longer empty. It held a name, a weight, a possibility. Dante. And in the dark, I realized I didn't want to run, not tonight, not anymore, because something had changed, not the world, me. The morning began like a question I didn't know how to answer. The light seeped through the curtains in gold threads, softer than usual, warmer, almost cautious. I woke to the weight of Emilia's arm across my waist, Lucas curled against my back, his breath shallow and steady. Their bodies had adapted to peace long before my mind had. I lay still, letting the silence stretch, letting it seep into my skin like warmth after a storm. I wanted to believe this was real, this calm, this roof, this bed that didn't bite. But somewhere inside, the part of me that had learned to flinch still whispered, "Not yet." When I rose, the robe was still where I left it, the hallway still quiet, the air still tinged with the smell of jasmine and something deeper, something masculine. I followed it toward the kitchen, my steps careful, my breath measured, like the wrong movement might undo everything. He was already there. Dante, his back to me, his posture impossibly straight even in stillness. He moved with precision, pouring coffee like it was a ritual, not a habit. There was no music, no television, just the slow sound of porcelain meeting wood and the echo of silence between us. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You're up earlier today?" I wasn't sure if it was a statement or an invitation. My voice came out quieter than I meant. I didn't sleep much. This time he turned. His eyes met mine like they were always ready for the weight of a gaze. Not invasive, not demanding, just steady, like he wanted to see exactly where I was inside that moment. He handed me a cup. I took it. Our fingers didn't touch this time. But the memory of last night pulsed between us, like heat trapped in the walls. "There are a few things you should understand," he said, his voice even but slower than usual, "about how things work here." I nodded, bracing. He leaned against the counter, his hands relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "This house isn't like others. You've noticed that." I nodded again. "There are rules," he continued, "not out of control, out of necessity." I didn't speak. just waited for the terms of my borrowed existence. You don't leave the grounds without me, not even to the gate. You don't speak to the men unless I tell you. And above all, his voice dropped, not in anger, but gravity. You don't say my name, not out loud, not to anyone, not ever. I blinked. The command didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a plea dressed in armor. I held his gaze. Is that how dangerous your name is? He didn't flinch. It's not a name, it's a door, one that opens into a world you don't belong in. I exhaled slowly, the weight of those words sitting low in my stomach. I'm not asking to belong. No, he said, and something flickered in his eyes. But that doesn't mean you're invisible. He said it with such finality that I didn't know how to respond. So I drank instead. The coffee was too strong, bitter, real. It grounded me, reminded me I was still inside something I hadn't chosen, but hadn't yet refused. Lucas ran into the room not long after, barefoot, pajama pants twisted, his hair a wild storm on his head. He stopped when he saw Dante, but didn't cower. He didn't lower his eyes like he used to when we passed men in the alley. He just looked at him, like children do, when they're still deciding if someone is made of danger or protection. Dante knelt, slow and careful. Morning. Lucas tilted his head. Are you a boss? Dante's mouth curved, but not into a smile, just the ghost of one, something like that. Lucas walked closer, undeterred. Can I go outside again? Dante looked to me first, then nodded. Just in the garden. Lucas ran off before either of us could say more. I stared at Dante, unsure what surprised me more, his gentleness or the fact that it wasn't performative. He didn't speak for a long time after that. Just watched Lucas through the window, hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. They don't know what you've done, I said quietly. No, he replied, but they still know who I am. I wanted to ask what that meant, but I didn't, because part of me already understood. Part of me knew that his power wasn't in what he'd done. It was in what he hadn't needed to do to terrify a room. Later that afternoon, I found Emilia in the garden, her tiny hands wrapped around a dandelion, blowing its seeds into the wind like wishes she wasn't afraid to make. I sat beside her, pulled her into my lap, and held her longer than I needed to, because there were moments that still felt borrowed, as if at any second someone might take it all back. He watched us from the balcony. Dante, a silhouette behind glass. I could feel his gaze, not heavy, but constant, and it didn't scare me. It unsettled me, because I wanted to be seen by him. I wanted him to watch, and I hated that I wanted that. That night, as the house settled into its hush, I found him again, not intentionally. I walked into the library looking for quiet, and there he was. Seated, reading, legs crossed, a drink untouched at his side. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression didn't shift. You don't sleep much. Neither do you. He nodded, closed the book gently, and gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat, not because I wanted conversation, but because the silence between us had started to feel like a place. I know this isn't normal, he said. Any of it. I looked at him. The way his shirt clung to his frame. The way the light caught the edge of his jaw, the way his hands didn't shake even when his voice did. But I don't want you to feel like a prisoner. And don't give me walls, I said, softer than I meant. His eyes met mine, and for the first time there was a crack in them, a fracture, something human. I give walls, he said, because I don't know how to offer safety without them. I leaned forward slightly, the distance between us a breath. Then maybe, let me decide which ones I can live with. He stared for a long time, then nodded, just once. I can try. It wasn't a promise, but it was the beginning of one. And for now, that was enough. The garden didn't look like a place where people had bled. It looked like something from a painting, the kind that pretends peace is easy, the kind that lies just enough to make you ache for it. Emilia ran through the tall grass with a ribbon in her hand, her laughter spinning through the air like music. Lucas followed close behind, his arms stretched out like wings. And I watched them from the stone bench beneath the sycamore tree, my hands clasped in my lap, my breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. The sun filtered through the branches in golden shards, soft and filtered like it didn't want to scare me. And maybe, for a few minutes, I let myself believe in the illusion, in the possibility that life could slow, soften, offer something more than survival. He didn't speak when he came to stand beside me. Dante never announced his presence. He moved like the air made room for him, silent, precise, but never cold. There was always a kind of heat beneath his stillness, like a storm held just below the surface. I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't have to. His nearness changed the texture of the world. My fingers tightened around each other. "They've adapted fast," I said, eyes still on the children. He nodded. I could feel it without seeing. Children know when something is real, even when they can't explain it. They'll get used to this. And then what? His silence folded into mine. The question hung between us like fog. I wasn't asking him for forever. I wasn't foolish enough to believe that word belonged to people like us. I just wanted to know if he saw the cliff we were both dancing near, if he felt the way the ground shifted every time they smiled too freely, every time I allowed myself to exhale too deeply. "They're safe," he said finally. "That's all that matters right now." I turned to look at him then, really look. His eyes were shadowed, the line of his mouth drawn in a way that told me he wasn't thinking about safety as a feeling, but as a strategy. His gaze followed the children, but I knew he wasn't seeing the way Amelia's ribbon caught the wind or how Lucas's arms flapped with innocent abandon. He was seeing exits, blind spots, the quiet possibility of violence that could slip in through any unlocked window. His body never rested, even here, even now. "They're safe," I echoed softly. "But are we?" His eyes flicked to mine. No evasion. Just a long pause before he said, "I don't know how to answer that." "Try," he sighed, not out of irritation, out of weight. He looked down at his hands, as if remembering every bruise they'd caused, every silence they'd enforced. "Safety, for people like me, is a temporary illusion, but I'd burn every name I've ever answered to if it meant keeping you here." My throat tightened. I didn't respond right away. I just reached for his hand, not to comfort, not to reassure, but to remind him that I was still here, still choosing him, even if I didn't know for how long. We stood like that for a moment, our hands barely touching, until Amelia's laugh rang out again, so bright it broke whatever spell had coiled around us. "She thinks you're magic," I said. He tilted his head. "And what about you?" "I think you're still deciding whether you want to be real." His smile was small, pained. "Being real means there's something to lose." "Then lose it," I whispered. "Lose the armor, just for a little while." He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because in the quiet that followed, he laced his fingers through mine. Not tightly, not desperately, just enough. Enough to say yes, enough to say not yet, enough to stay. Lucas called him Uncle that afternoon. It happened so easily I almost missed it. One moment he was chasing a paper airplane across the garden, his cheeks flushed, hair damp from the sun, and the next he was tugging at Dante's sleeve with that wide-eyed certainty children are born with, asking if his uncle could help him make a bigger one. The word didn't fall heavy. It didn't crack the earth or pull the sky down. It just hovered there, light and unburdened, like a question that already knew its answer. Dante paused, hand mid-air, and I saw something flicker across his face, something that didn't belong to the man who gave orders in silence and carried his name like a blade. He looked at Lucas, then at me, then back at the boy, and said only, "Okay." Nothing more, no correction, no flinch, just that single word, spoken like it cost him something and gave him something back at the same time. I watched them crouch together in the grass, Dante's fingers folding the paper with slow precision, Lucas beside him, mimicking every move. It should have been a small moment, harmless, but something about it made my ribs tighten, not from fear, from how much it made me want. I sat perfectly still, like any movement might shatter the fragile rhythm unfolding in front of me. I didn't know what scared me more, that my son had found someone to trust, or that the man he chose was made of shadows I didn't yet understand. Later, when the sun had dipped low and the garden wore its first layer of dusk, I found Dante near the window, alone again, the remnants of that paper airplane on the table beside him. He didn't turn when I walked in. I wasn't sure he even knew I was there until he spoke. He called me Uncle. His voice was quiet, not shocked, not amused. Something more dangerous, something close to wonder. I know, I said. He finally looked at me. You didn't stop him. I held his gaze. Should I have? He didn't answer right away. Just watched me the way he always did, like he was trying to memorize the parts of me I didn't show. He shouldn't see me that way, he said at last. Why not? Because I'm not built for innocence. I stepped closer. The room felt warmer than it had a moment ago. Or maybe it was just him. Then what are you built for? I asked, softer now. His jaw tightened. Survival, control, retaliation. My pulse slowed. And what if they don't need any of that? What if they just need you to catch their paper airplanes and listen to their questions and be someone who stays? He looked away then, like the truth in my words weighed too much to carry. I don't know how to stay, he said. Then learn. The silence after that was thick, heavy with everything neither of us was ready to name. I walked to the table, ran my fingers along the folded edges of the plane he'd made, felt the care in it, the precision. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that even a man made for war could hold something fragile without breaking it. He stepped behind me then, so close I could feel the heat of his breath against my neck. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I'm not safe, he whispered. You're not supposed to be. My voice shook, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of how much I wanted to believe in what was slowly building between us. This wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something harder, something deeper, the kind of connection that came after the world had already burned you down and someone still chose to stay in the ash with you. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His presence was a touch, his breath, a promise he didn't know how to make out loud. I turned to face him, slowly, deliberately, and when our eyes met, I didn't look away. Lucas doesn't see a monster, I said. He sees a man who listens when he speaks, who folds paper into wings and doesn't laugh when he asks about the stars. You think that doesn't matter? You think he'll forget? He didn't respond, not with words, just stood there, breathing through something I couldn't see, until his hand finally lifted and brushed my arm, just once, just barely. And I leaned into it, not to fall, but to show him I wouldn't run. That night I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, watching my children sleep. Lucas had his hand curled near his mouth, murmuring something in dreams. Emilia clutched a stuffed bear someone had left on her pillow, maybe one of the staff, maybe Dante himself. I didn't know, but I watched her chest rise and fall, her lashes flutter, and I realized what terrified me most wasn't the darkness we'd come from. It was the light I could feel coming. I got up, walked barefoot through the halls, the marble cool against my skin, the silence humming like a heartbeat. I found him outside, by the edge of the terrace, staring out at the night. I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. You scare me, I said instead. He didn't move. Because of what I've done. No, I exhaled. Because I don't know what I'll become if I let myself want this. He turned then, slowly, like the weight of that confession was something sacred. And what is this? He asked. I stepped closer, close enough to see the storm in his eyes. A man who holds my son's trust in the same hands that have taken lives. A silence that feels safer than noise. A possibility. He didn't breathe for a moment, and neither did I. I'm not the man you need, he said. No, I whispered. But maybe you're the man I choose, and sometimes that's what matters. Not the past. Not the scars, the choice. And we stood there, not touching, not speaking, just two broken people learning how to make space for something neither of us believed we deserved, something that might not save us, but might just make us want to be saved. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't a declaration. It wasn't loud or frantic or fueled by desperation. It was quiet, unapologetically still. A moment suspended in the breath between two people who had already touched every wound in each other, without laying bare a single piece of clothing. The house had gone to sleep. The lights had dimmed. The children were curled into blankets upstairs, lost in dreams that didn't need protecting, and I found myself standing in the doorway of the library, watching Dante as he sat in the armchair, unmoving, his face tilted toward the fireplace that hadn't been lit. There was no flame, no heat, just the shadow of someone who had lived too long in the cold and stopped believing it could be otherwise. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He looked up, and the moment our eyes met, something shifted, subtle but undeniable. The room tightened. The air thickened. Every silence we'd built between us cracked, not with violence, but with permission. I stepped forward slowly, barefoot, robe knotted at the waist, my skin still carrying the day's softness, the garden's wind, the memory of his fingers brushing my arm hours earlier. He stood as I approached, not quickly, not like a man possessed, but like someone who knew exactly what it cost to move towards something you want without armor. When I reached him, I stopped just close enough to feel the pull of his breath against mine. We stood like that for a long moment, the space between our bodies a live thing, aching and quiet. His hand lifted, not to take, not to claim, but to ask. His fingers hovered just beside my jaw, close enough that my skin trembled in anticipation. And then, gently, reverently, he closed the distance. His lips touched my forehead first, not my mouth, my forehead, a kiss without hunger, without demand, a kiss that said, "I see you," a kiss that said, "You don't owe me your pain." I closed my eyes and let the weight of that contact settle into my spine. My breath caught, not from surprise, but from recognition. No one had touched me like that in years, maybe ever, and it undid me, not because it was bold, because it was careful. When I opened my eyes, he was still watching me, and in that gaze I saw the man he didn't know how to be, the one buried under years of blood and silence, the one who folded paper airplanes and listened when my son asked about the moon. I lifted my hand and touched his face. The stubble against my fingers was soft, not sharp. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. And in that stillness, I kissed him. It was slow, hesitant, the kind of kiss that searches before it sinks. My lips brushed his, like a secret I wasn't ready to share, but he answered with breath, not force. His hands found my waist, gentle, almost unsure, as if he thought I might disappear if he held too tightly. I deepened the kiss, just slightly, just enough to let him feel that I was choosing this, choosing him. He tasted like midnight, like something dark and warm and earned. His fingers slid into the fabric of my robe, not to undress me, but to anchor himself. And I leaned in, pressing closer, feeling the way our bodies fit, not perfectly, but with the kind of tension that writes its own language. He pulled back just a little, his forehead resting against mine, our breath mingling in the space where our mouths had been. "I don't want to break this," he whispered, his voice rough with restraint. "Then don't," I said, my hand slipping under the hem of his shirt, feeling the heat of his skin. "Just feel it." And he did. We moved together slowly, like two people learning to dance in the dark, not afraid of the missteps, only afraid of stopping. He lifted me into his arms, his hold steady, his breath uneven. He carried me upstairs without a word, as if words might fracture what was already too fragile to name. In the bedroom, the shadows wrapped around us like silk. He laid me down carefully, like a promise, like a prayer. There was no urgency, no frantic pulling. We undressed each other the way you unwrap a gift you don't believe you deserve. His hand slid across my skin like apology. My fingers mapped the landscape of his body like forgiveness. And when we came together, it wasn't an explosion. It was an unfolding, a slow, aching surrender. His mouth found my neck, my collarbone, the inside of my wrist. He kissed me like I was something to memorize. I traced the scar near his ribs with my tongue, felt his body shudder beneath mine. We didn't speak. Our mouths were too full of breath, of heat, of the gravity that tethered us to that moment. When it happened, it wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was deep and low and trembling. We clung to each other like drowning people who had finally found land, not sure if it would hold, but grateful for the chance to rest. After, he held me against his chest, our skin still slick, our hearts still searching for rhythm. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of his breathing, let it guide mine back to stillness. "I didn't think I could feel like this again," I said, not expecting a response. He tightened his hold. "Neither did I." I didn't ask what this meant. I didn't ask what would come next. I just lay there, wrapped in the warmth of a man the world feared, and felt the quiet miracle of being wanted without condition, of being touched without erasure. And when I finally drifted into sleep, it wasn't escape. It was surrender, safe, whole, awake in the one place I thought I'd never find again. Home. I woke before him. The light was soft, just barely creeping in through the curtains, casting slow golden streaks across the bed, across his shoulder, across the hollow between his collarbones, where my breath had rested hours earlier. He lay on his side, one arm draped loosely around my waist, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm I couldn't look away from. There was something reverent in watching him like that, unguarded still, stripped of the silence and the shadows he carried like a second skin. I traced the edge of his forearm with my fingers, slow, feather-light, memorizing the way his skin warmed beneath my touch. I didn't want to wake him. I just wanted to stay in that moment a little longer, where the world hadn't yet crawled back in through the cracks. He stirred slightly, not fully waking, just shifting closer, his lips brushing against my shoulder, not in intention but in instinct. I closed my eyes and let it hold me, the quiet, the weight of him. The way my body had already learned the shape of his, even though my mind still questioned what this was, what it could be, what it dared to become. Love wasn't a word I was ready to say. Not yet. Not out loud. But whatever this was, it had roots now. Breath, gravity. I slipped out of bed when his breath deepened again, careful not to disturb him, pulling on a robe as I padded across the room. The floor was cold against my feet, a grounding reminder that life was still waiting outside the warmth we'd built in the dark. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. There was softness around my eyes that hadn't been there in years. A quiet to my mouth that didn't feel like surrender. I looked like a woman who had been touched with care, not possessed, not erased, touched. And it undid something in me all over again. Downstairs, the house was still. The kind of stillness that listens, that watches, that makes you feel like a single breath might echo. I found the kitchen by scent. Coffee, dark and rich and grounding. One of the staff had started it already, and I offered a soft thank you as I passed. But they didn't speak. They never did. And maybe that was part of the agreement here. Speak only when necessary. Disappear when not. I didn't mind the silence. I had grown fluent in it long before this house. The garden called to me. I stepped outside with the mug warm in my hands, the air crisp and awake, the sky just starting to stretch its blue across the horizon. Emilia and Lucas would wake soon. They'd run barefoot through the grass and pull me by the hands to show me things I already knew, but would pretend not to. For them, for the magic. I sat on the stone bench, legs curled beneath me, and exhaled for the first time that morning. I didn't know how long I'd have this calm, this stolen breath of a life I hadn't believed I could ever taste again, but I had it now, and I would let it fill me, even if it burned later when it left. He found me there. I didn't hear him come. I never did, but I felt him, the shift in the air, the gravity that always followed him into a room, into a breath, into me. I didn't turn, just waited, and when he sat beside me, close enough that our thighs brushed, he didn't speak at first either. He just breathed, and we let the silence settle again between us, like something sacred. "When you left the bed," he said finally, his voice low and raw, "I thought maybe it was a mistake, that maybe I'd pulled you into something you weren't ready to carry." I looked at him, slowly, and found his eyes already on me, unshielded, still heavy with sleep and something deeper. "It wasn't a mistake," I said. "I've lived through mistakes. They don't feel like that." He nodded once, slowly, like he didn't quite believe me, but needed to. "I don't know how to be gentle," he said. "Not outside a night like that, not in the daylight." "You were gentle," I whispered. "More than anyone has ever been." He turned away, jaw tightening. "That's the problem, Mariana. That shouldn't be true." I reached for his hand then, threaded my fingers through his. But it is. He held on to me like he didn't know how not to. And we sat like that while the sky peeled open and the day began to stretch its bones. When Amelia came running, hair wild, voice sweet and sharp as a bell, she stopped short at the sight of us, tangled, seated, still. Then she smiled, like she knew something, like she approved. Lucas followed close behind, quieter, always quieter, but his eyes found Dante's and didn't flinch. Not anymore. We spent the morning in soft pieces, toast with butter. Lucas showing Dante how to tie a complicated knot he'd learned from a book someone had left near the fireplace. Amelia dancing between shadows and sunlight like nothing had ever hurt her, and I watched it all with a quiet in my chest that felt dangerously close to peace. But peace is fragile, and I knew enough to recognize the tremor in the distance, the way Dante's jaw set tighter as the day wore on, the way his hands moved with less grace, more tension. Something had shifted. Something had knocked at the edge of the world he was trying to build and reminded him of the one he came from. That evening, he didn't join us for dinner. One of the staff said he had work, but I knew better. I knew that sometimes a man has to go back into the dark to make sure it hasn't followed him. I let the children fall asleep in the warmth of fairy tales and old lullabies, then walked the halls alone, barefoot again, the hem of my dress brushing the floor like a whisper. I found him in the study, alone, a drink untouched, his fingers tight around the edge of the desk, his eyes on nothing. He didn't look up when I entered. He didn't have to. "I'm still here," I said, and he turned slowly, his face unreadable, his voice stripped to something quieter than usual. "For how long?" And I walked to him, put my hands on either side of his face, and said what I hadn't dared to before, "For as long as you don't run," because I wouldn't chase him, not into the darkness, not into the silence, but I would wait for him here, in the light. The night shattered without warning. It didn't begin with screams or fire or the sound of glass breaking. It began with a silence so dense it felt like a scream holding its breath. I was in the hallway, returning from the study, the air still heavy with the weight of things we hadn't yet learned how to say out loud, when the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Not physically, but in that invisible way you feel just before the storm breaks. I stopped walking, I listened, and that's when I knew. The house was no longer resting, it was bracing. The first sound was distant, a sharp crack, quick, cold, unmistakable. A gunshot. My heart seized. Another followed, closer. I didn't run, I flew, my body moving before thought, my blood a current of instinct and fear and fury. I turned corners blindly, crashing into walls, knocking over a vase that exploded behind me like glass thunder. Upstairs, the children. Get to them now. My feet hit the steps 2 at a time, breath heaving, throat burning. I opened the door with a force that snapped the latch and found them both already awake, eyes wide, bodies frozen. I didn't waste time with words. I grabbed them, one on each side, and pulled them into me like wings folding back into the body of a bird, too exhausted to fly. We didn't scream. There was no time. The shots were louder now, closer, like the house itself was being ripped apart, one heartbeat at a time. I backed into the corner, shielding them with my body, my arms shaking with a strength I didn't know I had. Lucas was silent, holding Amelia, who whimpered into my chest. I kissed the top of her head, over and over, like that might keep her from hearing what was happening just beyond the walls. And then the door opened. It was Dante. His face was carved from war, his eyes pure steel. He crossed the room in 2 strides, reached for us without pause, and I let him. I let him take us because I knew he wasn't there to ask. He was there to save. He lifted Amelia into one arm, took Lucas's hand with the other, and turned to me with a voice that cut clean through the chaos. "Now, move." We ran. Downstairs. Through hallways I hadn't seen before, past men with weapons, past walls that bled smoke and fear. Dante didn't speak again. He just moved fast and controlled, like he'd rehearsed this 100 times. He opened a panel behind a painting, no hesitation, and led us into a stairwell lit by red emergency lights that flickered like dying stars. We descended in silence, my children wrapped around me, my breath strangled in my throat. At the bottom, a door, reinforced, locked. He pressed his palm to a sensor and the bolt slid open with a heavy groan. The room beyond was windowless, dim, thick with air that hadn't moved in weeks. He ushered us inside, closed the door behind us, and locked it again. And then, for the first time since the shots began, he turned to me. His chest heaved. His eyes were fire held in a cage. "Stay here. No one comes in but me." "Dante!" He crossed to me in 2 steps, took my face in both hands. "I swear to you," he said, voice low, urgent, breaking, "I will bring you back into the light." I grabbed his wrists. "Be careful." He kissed my forehead, hard and fast, like he was afraid he'd never get the chance again. And then he was gone. The room went silent. I sank to the floor, pulling my children into my arms, whispering to them that it would be okay, that they were safe, that he would come back. My voice didn't shake. My body did. I listened for sounds beyond the walls, heard gunfire, then footsteps, then nothing. Time passed like a wound. The room smelled like iron and cold metal. The lights flickered. Lucas buried his face into my side. Emilia clutched my hand so tight her knuckles turned white. I didn't let go. I didn't close my eyes. I didn't breathe. And then, finally, the lock clicked. The door opened. Dante stood there, blood on his shirt, smoke in his hair, but alive. His eyes found mine first, then the children, and something in him seemed to crack and hold all at once. "It's over," he said, and I believed him. He crossed the room in silence, knelt beside us, and I wrapped my arms around him, trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of relief. We didn't speak. We just held on. Because sometimes the only thing you can say after surviving the fire is that you made it out, together. The house smelled like smoke and silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, the kind that presses against the walls like breath held too long. I stood in the doorway of the hallway that led to the south wing, what was left of it. The explosion had blown out part of the corridor. The walls were blackened, the tiles cracked. A window was gone, leaving only the wind to slip through with cold fingers and remind us how easily everything we built could be broken. 2 bodies were covered in dark cloths on the lawn. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. Knowing their names would make the blood harder to ignore. Dante stood near the remains of the stone fountain, his back to me, hands on his hips, head down. His shirt was ruined, stained, his posture unreadable. His stillness louder than any scream. I didn't call out. I watched him for a long time, letting my heartbeat slow just enough to feel human again. The children were inside, curled on the couch, wrapped in blankets, warm, fed, safe. They had stopped shaking. I had not. When I finally walked toward him, my steps didn't echo. The earth seemed to hush around him, as if it too didn't know how to reach a man who had given everything to protect something he didn't believe he deserved. He didn't turn when I stopped beside him. His voice was barely above a whisper. "They came for you." I said nothing. "They saw you, saw the children. That was enough." He looked at the scorched wall, his jaw tight, his eyes full of a fury so cold it didn't need volume. "You're my weakness now." I touched his arm. "We were always going to be someone's target. This didn't start with you. It just found us here." He finally looked at me, and in that look, I saw something I hadn't before. Not just guilt, not just anger, but fear. Not for himself, for us. And that, more than the violence, more than the fire, broke something open in me. "I'll go," I whispered, "if that's what keeps them safe." His breath caught, sharp. "No, you don't run." "I'm not running, I'm protecting." "I already failed at that," he said, voice thick. "You didn't." I stepped closer. "You got us out. You bled for us. You held back a war with your bare hands." He shook his head, looking away again. "It's not enough. The world I built doesn't know how to let me have peace. It will keep coming. "Then let's burn it down," I said. He turned back to me, and there was something dangerous in his stillness, something reverent in the way he touched my face with both hands, like he was memorizing me in case the wind took me. "I want you to stay. I want you to choose this, even if I don't know how to be the man you need." "I don't need a man who's perfect," I said. "I need a man who won't run when it gets hard." He kissed me then, not soft, not careful. It was a kiss made of ash and breath, and every inch of fear that had wrapped around our spines since the first bullet cracked the night. I let it consume me, let his mouth remind me we were still here, still standing, still something. And when we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed. "We rebuild," he whispered. "We rebuild," I echoed, because that's what love does, even in ruins. That night we made love like survivors, not to escape the fear, not to prove something to the dark, but to anchor ourselves to what hadn't been taken. The room was dim, the scent of smoke still clinging to the edges of the air, and his skin was warm beneath my fingers, real, alive, steady. There was no music, just breath, just heartbeat, just the soft sounds we made when language lost its use. He undressed me slowly, reverently, as if he were unwrapping something fragile that had already been broken once, and somehow learned how to hold its shape again. I touched the bruises on his ribs, kissed the edge of the scar above his hip, and let my mouth linger there, not for lust, but for memory. So I wouldn't forget that even men who are made of war can be tender if someone teaches them how. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every brush of skin was a sentence, every sigh a paragraph, every silence a page, between us that didn't have to be filled with anything but presence. When he entered me, it wasn't fast or desperate. It was slow, as if our bodies were trying to find the rhythm of a song neither of us had heard in years. He moved, like he didn't want to finish, like the act of being inside me was enough to stay whole. I wrapped my legs around him, arms around his back, and pressed my forehead to his as our bodies folded into one another, not to disappear, but to be seen. It wasn't about climax. It was about contact, about staying in the space between the noise, about choosing to stay even when everything else had already tried to pull us apart. We stayed. We held. We breathed through the quiet after, our bodies tangled, his hand tracing circles along the back of my thigh, as if he were still learning the shape of peace. I rested my head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Slower now, steadier, but not unguarded. He would always have walls. So would I. But maybe the trick wasn't to tear them down. Maybe it was to learn how to knock gently, how to wait on the other side until the door opened on its own. "You're too quiet," he murmured, his lips brushing my temple. "I'm trying to remember how this feels," I whispered back, "before something comes and takes it." "It won't," he said. I didn't argue. I just closed my eyes and let the lie rest between us like a blanket. The next morning, I moved through the house differently. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't surviving. I was present. The staff noticed. Their eyes followed me longer. Their silences stretched differently. Not out of threat, out of reverence, as if I'd become more than the woman who'd arrived broken and barefoot with 2 children wrapped in desperation. I was something else now, something that stood beside Dante Alcazar and didn't flinch. The children returned to their rhythm quickly, as children do, resilience worn like skin. Emilia asked if she could plant flowers near the garden wall. Lucas wanted to know if the bullet holes would stay or be painted over. I told them both yes, for different reasons. I found Dante in the south wing, overseeing repairs with a quiet authority that didn't need volume to be obeyed. He was dressed in black again, sleeves rolled, a smear of ash on his forearm where he'd touched something burned without caring. He looked up when I entered, and his eyes, those eyes that once held nothing, softened the moment they found mine. "You slept?" he asked. "With you," I said. His mouth curved slightly, the closest thing to peace I'd seen on his face since the first shot fired. "I want to show you something," he said. He led me through a door I hadn't noticed before, down a hallway not lit like the others. No gold, no glass, just stone and old light. At the end, another door, wooden, thick, unmarked. He opened it without a word. Inside was a room not made for power, not designed for intimidation. It was quiet, lived in. A fireplace, a single armchair, shelves lined with photographs, a small record player, a table with worn corners, and an old chessboard inlaid with dust. He watched me take it in. "This was my sister's room," he said. I turned to him slowly. "She died because of something I did, a choice I made. I built everything after that moment. The empire, the silence, the fear. It all started with losing her." I walked toward the photographs, fingers brushing the edges of lives frozen in time. A girl with his eyes, laughing, spinning, whole. "I tried to build something no one could break," he said, "and then you came, and I realized it had never been about building. It had always been about hiding." I looked at him then, and he was already looking at me. No mask, no control, just a man stripped bare by the one truth he could no longer outrun. "I'm not asking you to save me," I said. "I just want you to let me stay." He nodded once, then again. And in that room where grief had once carved him into a weapon, he reached for me, not like a shield, not like a possession, but like a man who had finally learned how to ask without fear. I went to him, without hesitation, because this was the moment. Not when we fell, but when we chose not to. He didn't come to bed that night. I waited for him in the stillness, the sheets cooled by absence, the silence layered and alert. The room breathed differently without him. I curled beneath the covers, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the pulse in my ears, to the house around me, its aching hush, its restrained heart. It had been quiet since the attack, but not the kind of quiet that means peace. It was the kind that comes after thunder, when the air is still deciding if the storm is really gone. I lay awake until the moon shifted angles, and even the shadows gave up their secrets. And still, he didn't come. At dawn, I rose, slipped out of the room like something unfinished. The house was slow with sleep, the air cold enough to remind me I was alone. I moved through the corridors barefoot, feeling the chill rise through the stone, grounding me, holding me. The sky outside was pale, thin with light, hesitant. I passed the kitchen, the study. His chair by the window was empty. I kept going, not panicked, just pulled by something unnameable. It led me to the west wing, to a door I hadn't opened before. It wasn't locked, just waiting. He was there, sitting on the edge of the leather couch, his back to me, his head bowed like the weight of it had finally settled. He didn't hear me at first, or maybe he did, and he just needed the silence to speak first. When he looked up, the morning light hit his face at an angle that made him look older, not tired, not worn, just deeper, like whatever had been hiding inside him had finally come to the surface. "I didn't want to wake you," he said, voice hoarse. "You didn't," I said gently. "You just didn't come back." His hands rested on his knees, fingers clasped. I couldn't sleep. I crossed the room slowly until I stood in front of him. He didn't move, just lifted his eyes to mine and waited. So I sat beside him, our knees touching, our bodies aligned like compass points. And for a while neither of us spoke. I leaned my head against his shoulder, and only then did he exhale. "I keep thinking," he said, "that it was supposed to end differently. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. His world, his name, the empire he'd built with blood and silence and every inch of himself he had never been allowed to protect. He thought walking away from it would be enough, that choosing love would cancel out the ghosts. But men like him are never allowed to walk away clean." "You're still here," I whispered. "Am I?" "Yes." He tilted his head toward mine. "And if I told you I don't know how much longer I can carry it, all of it, then I'd carry some for you." He was quiet after that, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for comfort, only breath. His hand found mine, fingers tangled without grace, just need. I kissed the back of his knuckles. He closed his eyes. Later, when the house began to wake, we remained there, still and close, two bodies stitched together by choice, not rescue. I didn't ask what came next. I didn't ask if he would finally let go of the world that kept trying to pull him back. I just stayed, because staying was what we hadn't been taught. And now, We were learning. He was different the next day. Not colder, not cruel, just distant, like something inside him had folded back in on itself overnight. His voice was careful, every gesture measured, as if we had never kissed, never burned, never whispered promises between the silence. He moved through the house like a ghost wearing the shape of a man I had come to trust. And still I didn't ask, not immediately. I watched, I waited, I gave him space, the way you give space to a wound that hasn't decided whether to close or to bleed. He spoke to the children gently, even smiled once when Amelia made him wear a flower crown she'd woven from weeds and ribbon. But the smile didn't reach his eyes, not the way it had before. By late afternoon, I found him in the library. He was staring at the fireplace again, the same way he had the first time I saw him unravel. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, unmoving, like every muscle in his body had agreed to hold still until the war inside him chose a direction. I stood in the doorway, watching the way the light hit the side of his face, how it caught the grey at his temples, how it refused to soften the angles of his grief. "You're retreating," I said. He didn't flinch. "I can feel it," I continued, stepping into the room. "The way you pull away when something starts to feel like home." "I'm not retreating," he said, voice quiet but sharp. "I'm protecting you." "From what?" He turned then, slowly, and looked at me like I'd just asked him to unbury every corpse in his memory. "From me." The words didn't wound. They opened, a deep ache, a familiar echo. I walked to him, not to challenge, not to argue, but to stand close enough for his breath to recognize mine. "I knew who you were before I ever let you touch me. I don't think you did. Then tell me." He stood, towering, calm, but his hands curled into fists. "I've killed people, Mariana. I've tortured men. I've done things that would make you run if you saw them, if you heard what I've done when mercy wasn't an option. There's no soft version of me, no safe one." I didn't move, not an inch. "Have you ever hurt a woman who didn't deserve it?" "No." Have you ever laid hands on someone innocent?" "No." "Then don't talk to me about monsters, not when I've known the real ones." He looked at me like he wanted to believe that, like a part of him had always wanted to. But guilt is a drug men like him don't know how to stop taking. "I can't let you love me," he said, "because if I let you and then something happens, if someone touches you because of me, if they take you to punish me, I won't survive it." "You're already not surviving it," I said, softer now. "You're living in the aftermath of things you can't undo, trying to stay alone so nothing else breaks. But that's not strength, Dante. That's surrender in disguise." He stepped back, just enough. "I'm trying to keep you alive." "No," I said, stepping forward, matching him breath for breath. "You're trying to control what can't be controlled. Life doesn't work like that. Love doesn't. You don't get to rewrite the rules just because you're afraid." "I'm not afraid for me." "I know," I whispered. "That's why it matters." The silence between us was heavy, trembling, charged with everything we'd already given and everything we were still trying not to need. He looked at me like he wanted to say something he didn't have the words for, and I waited. I waited because I loved him. I waited because I knew he needed time to find his way back to the truth we'd already lived inside each other's skin. But he didn't speak. He just turned away and walked out. That night, I sat by the window long after the children had gone to sleep, the moon tracing thin silver lines across the floor, and I wondered if maybe some people only know how to love in the quiet between wars. If maybe he was born from a kind of loneliness too old to name. I thought about the way he touched me when no one else was watching, the way he looked at Lucas like he was afraid of being seen as something good, the way he smiled like it hurt. And I knew then I would wait, not forever, but long enough for him to learn that he didn't have to disappear just to be worth keeping, because some men don't need saving. They need to be forgiven for believing they don't deserve to be. I told him my truth, the way you open a wound you've been hiding for years, slowly, without anesthesia, and only because there's finally someone in the room willing to look. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, just breath, just the rhythm of my voice cracking slightly as I spoke through the past that had followed me into every room, even this one. I didn't plan it. I just woke up that morning with the weight of silence pressing against my chest and knew I couldn't carry it alone anymore. He was sitting at the table reading something I didn't ask about, the sunlight warming his bare forearms, the room thick with the kind of peace that always feels temporary, and I said his name. Not loudly, not urgently, but softly, like it belonged in the middle of a confession. He looked up immediately, and the second our eyes met, I think he knew. "There's something I haven't told you," I began. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shift. He just nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and waited like a man who understood that sometimes the most dangerous truths arrive wearing calm. "I wasn't just running from poverty," I said. "Or from the father of my children. There was another man." I watched his expression, but it didn't change. He didn't flinch, but something in the air did. His name was Ricardo Valverde. The name hit differently, heavy, familiar. Dante blinked once, slowly, and I knew he recognized it. Of course he did. Men like Ricardo left scars in every room they entered. I met him when I was young, stupid, hungry for something that looked like escape. I didn't know what he was, not at first. I thought he was just dangerous in the way broken girls are drawn to, but it wasn't danger. It was control, possession. He wanted me like men want fire they can trap in glass. I tried to leave once. He made sure I wouldn't try again. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. Dante noticed. He reached across the table and took one gently, holding it without squeezing, grounding me without claiming me. "I found out I was pregnant not long after," I continued. "He never knew. I ran. I disappeared. I stopped using my name. I stopped sleeping. I stopped trusting the sound of my own footsteps. For years I lived like a shadow, dragging two smaller shadows behind me, until you." He didn't speak, not right away, just lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the back of it so quietly it barely existed. "You should have told me sooner," he said finally. "I know, but I understand why you didn't." I looked at him, at the tension just beneath his calm, at the restraint holding his jaw in place. "What will you do?" His eyes met mine, unflinching. "Whatever I have to, but not like before. I'm not that man anymore." "Then promise me something. Anything. If he comes, if he finds me, don't become him to destroy him." He leaned forward, his voice a low, steady thread. "If he comes, he won't touch you, he won't touch the children, and I won't become him, because the moment I do, he wins. And I don't plan to lose what I've built with you just to prove I still know how to burn things down." Something inside me cracked open, not from fear, from relief. He was changing, not because I asked, but because he finally saw something worth changing for. And I couldn't help but wonder if that's what love really was. Not the fire, not the surrender, but the quiet vow to stay soft in a world that taught you how to harden. Later that night, while the children slept and the house exhaled into stillness, I sat beside him on the edge of the bed, our hands entwined beneath the sheets, and I knew that even if the past came knocking, even if the darkness we'd both escaped tried to find its way back in, we would answer the door together. Because some truths don't ruin you, they free you, and I had finally told mine. He told me at dusk. We were on the terrace, the sky bruised with gold and violet, the kind of color that makes silence feel sacred. The children were laughing somewhere in the garden, their voices carried like wind over water, and Dante stood beside me with his hands on the railing, eyes fixed on nothing. I knew something was coming. I felt it in the way his breath slowed, in the way his shoulders curved inward just slightly, like the weight he'd carried for years had finally become too real to ignore. "I've decided," he said, not looking at me. "I'm getting out." The words didn't surprise me. Not really. I'd seen the shift in him for weeks, the way he moved through the house with less noise, the way he touched me like he was afraid of leaving a bruise. Still, hearing it out loud felt like stepping into a place where the air had changed, where everything smelled of endings, even if they were necessary. "Out of what?" I asked, even though I already knew. He turned to me then, and for the first time, I saw something roar in his eyes. Not fear, not regret, but a kind of quiet desperation. "All of it," he said. "The roots, the power, the name. I'm selling it off, piece by piece, dissolving it, making it disappear." I watched him carefully. "And then what?" His jaw tightened. "Then I stop being the man they're hunting." I stepped closer until my fingers grazed the edge of his shirt. "And what does that make you instead?" He didn't answer. Not immediately. Just reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my face, his hand lingering there, his thumb warm against my cheek. "Someone who finally has something to lose." I closed my eyes, let the moment wash over me like rain after a long, cruel drought. When I looked up again, I saw him. Not the legend, not the myth, not the man whose name was whispered in back rooms like a prayer or a curse. Just a man, tired, unfolding, becoming. "They're not going to let you go quietly," I said. "I know. They'll see it as betrayal." He nodded. "Then let them." We didn't speak for a while after that. We just stood there, the world breathing around us, his hand still on my face, my heart still learning how to believe this wasn't another illusion. That night, he called his men, the inner circle, the ones who would either follow him into fire or turn it on him. He sat at the head of the long dining room table, the children asleep upstairs, and I watched from the shadows just beyond the doorway. I didn't need to hear every word. I could feel them, the tension, the disbelief, the resistance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He laid it out like stone, steady and cold. "It ends now," he said. "You can stay in the old ways, or you can walk with me, but I won't lead you anymore, and I won't bleed for a kingdom I never asked to rule." Someone objected. I saw the flash of anger in a gesture, the cut of a voice too loud for this house. Dante didn't blink. He simply stood, leaned both hands on the table, and let the silence speak for him. And it did. When he left the room, no one followed, except Luciana. She cornered him near the hallway, her heels sharp against the floor, her voice a silk-covered blade. I didn't hear the beginning, only the end. "They will come for you now," she said. "You've made yourself a target." He looked at her the way men look at ghosts. "Let them, I've made peace with it." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You've made a woman your peace, and that makes you soft." I stepped into the room before he could reply, not because he needed defending, but because I wanted her to see what softness could survive. "I'm not his weakness," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I'm the reason he doesn't need to kill to feel alive." Luciana stared at me like I was a myth she hadn't believed until now. Then she turned, heels echoing down the hallway, disappearing into the dark. Dante looked at me, and something cracked in his chest. "You shouldn't have had to say that." "I wanted to," I replied, "and I'd say it again." Later, in our bed, he lay beside me with his hand resting over my ribs, as if he could feel the rhythm of my breath and trust it to keep time. His voice was barely a whisper. "If they come for me now, it won't be about business. It'll be personal." I turned to him, my face close enough that my words didn't need space. "Then make it personal for them too. Show them what a man with something to lose looks like." He kissed me slowly, not like a goodbye, but like a promise. And somewhere deep inside me I believed him, because a man like Dante Alcazar doesn't walk away unless he's already decided he's worth saving. He was gone before the sun rose. I felt it the moment my hand reached for him in the warm stretch of morning, and found nothing but cool sheets and the absence of breath. No note, no whisper of clothes rustling, just silence where his body had been. At first, I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he was in the garden or downstairs with coffee, or simply watching the house breathe from his favorite window. But the minutes stretched too long, the house too quiet. I moved through the halls barefoot, robe trailing behind me like a question without an answer, searching with a growing pressure in my chest, each room more hollow than the last. And then I saw Luciana standing in the foyer, arms crossed, mouth drawn tight. That was when I knew. She didn't say it outright. She didn't need to. She just looked at me with eyes that had seen this before, that had stood in the wreckage of men like Dante and learned not to cry when they burned themselves down. I didn't ask her where he went. I asked her why. "He's trying to finish it alone," she said. "He thinks disappearing will protect you. He promised. He lied to himself more than to you." My knees didn't buckle. I didn't break. I simply nodded and walked away, because there was no scream inside me loud enough to fix the space he'd left behind. I kept the children close that day, read to them with a voice that didn't tremble, held them longer, cooked as if I still remembered how. Every now and then, Lucas would ask if Dante was coming back for dinner, and I'd smile, the kind of lie that tastes like glass. Night came like a tide, and I couldn't sleep. I stood in our room, staring at the door, willing it to open. I traced the place he used to lay, my fingers finding the indent his body left behind, still there, still holding memory. And that's when I saw it, tucked between two books on the shelf, a white envelope, unsealed, my name written in his hand. I read it standing up because I knew if I sat down, I wouldn't get back up again. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay. Not yet. Not with him still out there. Not with a past that knows your name now. I need him to think I'm broken. I need him to come for me, not for you. This isn't about revenge. It's about ending it, so we can breathe without looking over our shoulders. I never knew what it meant to want something beyond power, until the sound of your voice at night, until your son asked me how to throw a baseball, until your daughter put a flower in my hair and told me it meant I belonged. I'm not built for promises, but I meant every word I said to you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for time. And if I don't come back, know that it was never fear that took me from you. It was love, only love. The letter slipped from my hands. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I sat on the edge of the bed, curled my knees to my chest, and breathed through the ache, the way you breathe through labor, because pain this sharp must be bringing something into the world. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th, a package arrived. No return address, just my name. Inside, a folded newspaper, a headline. Mafia leader confirmed, dead in explosion outside Tepoztlan. The photo showed fire, smoke, nothing else. The article was short, cold, precise. I read it twice, then again. My hands went numb, my ears filled with white noise. I stood up, walked to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and buried the newspaper beneath a tangle of clothes that didn't matter anymore. I told no one. Not yet. I tucked the children into bed that night with a calm that didn't belong to me. I kissed their foreheads and smiled at their questions and told them he was somewhere safe. And when the house was quiet, when the only sound was the hum of the night pressing its face against the windows, I let myself fall to the floor, slowly, quietly. I pressed my face to the cold wood and let my body remember him, not as he was in fire, but as he was in light, in the garden, in the kitchen, in bed beside me, whispering dreams he didn't believe he deserved. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. I walked the halls like a ghost. I sat in his chair. I stared at the door. I waited for footsteps that never came. But grief doesn't ask for permission. It moves in. It rearranges the furniture. It leaves the light on in rooms you're too afraid to enter. And still, I waited. Because even after the letter, even after the fire, even after the silence, something inside me still believed that love like his doesn't disappear. It retreats. It heals in shadow. And sometimes it returns. It was Lucas who found the note, days after the silence had thickened, after I'd memorized every breathless corner of the house that no longer felt like a home. He had been playing in the hallway, looking for his toy plane, the one Dante had fixed weeks ago with a piece of tape and quiet pride. I was folding laundry in the bedroom, trying to exist, trying to create rhythm where grief had carved stillness. He ran in holding something between his fingers, eyes wide, uncertain, not afraid, just filled with the kind of wonder that comes when the impossible brushes against the edge of what we've been told is gone. "Mama," he whispered. This was in Dante's jacket. I took it from him gently, already knowing, already trembling. A piece of paper folded 4 times, soft around the creases like it had been hidden long before it was found. His handwriting, rushed, familiar. Ink slightly smudged, as if time or sweat or worry had tried to blur it. If you're reading this, it means I'm still alive. I sat down, not slowly, not carefully. I sank into the floor like gravity had remembered me. My hands shook as I unfolded the rest, eyes racing ahead of my breath, heart climbing into my throat as every word lit a fire I'd tried to bury. I couldn't say anything before I left. I needed you to believe I might not come back, so he would believe it too. I had to disappear. Not just from your sight, but from theirs. There were still too many eyes on you, too many men who would bleed just to see me broken, and I couldn't let them trace my love back to your door. If this note has found you, then I made it through something. Or maybe I'm still running. Maybe I'm bleeding somewhere. Maybe I'm close. All I know is I'm not done. Not with this. Not with us. I will come back to you, and if I can't, I need you to keep breathing. For them. For me. For the life we almost got to have. I pressed the paper to my chest, crushed it there, let my eyes close, and felt the scream rise inside me, but not from pain, from something sharper, wilder, hope. Not the soft kind that whispers, the kind that claws. I kissed Lucas's head, held him close, and told him everything would be okay, even though the world was still trembling beneath our feet. For the next few days, the house changed. I began to listen for footsteps again, to watch the shadows on the walls for movement that wasn't mine. I stopped hiding his picture in the drawer. I stopped mourning him like he was gone. And in return, the world began to whisper. A phone call, no voice, just breath, then a click, a package on the gate, no name. Inside, a flower I'd once put behind his ear when Amelia asked him to play Prince for an afternoon in the garden. A message scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt. Don't close the window. My sky comes in through there, each sign subtle, each one a breath on the back of my neck, and none of it made sense unless you've loved someone who refuses to vanish, who holds on even in silence, who turns distance into devotion. I didn't tell the children, not yet. I let them keep thinking he was far away, doing something hard, something good, but they began to laugh louder, sleep better, as if something in them remembered his heartbeat and knew it hadn't stopped. At night I stood by the window he once leaned against and watched the horizon, for a shape I hadn't seen in weeks. I pressed the tips of my fingers to the glass and whispered his name into the dark, not because I expected an answer, but because I knew it would find him somehow. Then one evening I smelled smoke, not fire, not danger, tobacco, the kind he only lit when he was trying to quiet his thoughts, when the weight of the world pressed too hard against his ribs. I turned, looked out, and saw nothing, but I knew. He was close, closer than ever. I sat on the floor with his letter in my lap, the same robe I'd worn the last night we slept side by side wrapped around my legs like memory. The wind slipped through the crack in the window, soft and cool and full of breath. I closed my eyes and let it touch me, and for the first time since he'd left, I didn't feel hollow. I felt watched, guarded, beloved. And I whispered to the silence, the stars, the ghosts that kept my secrets. Come home, I'm still yours. Still waiting, still whole. The first sign was the dog, the mangy one that used to sleep by the back gate, the one Dante always pretended not to care about, but somehow fed every night without admitting it. He hadn't come around in weeks, not since the shooting, not since the house began carrying the weight of grief like a second skin. But that morning, just before the light spilled fully across the stone path, I saw him sitting straight and still, eyes fixed on the curve of the hill that disappeared into the trees. Waiting, alert. I moved closer to the window, heart slowing, breath tightening. He was still as stone, tail not wagging, body braced, and in the space between two heartbeats I understood. Someone was coming. My hands trembled as I reached for the latch, as I opened the door slowly. As I stepped into the early morning like a woman chasing a dream she swore she'd let die. The grass was cold, dew kissed my ankles, and the sky hadn't yet decided whether to be blue or grey. I followed the dog's gaze, and there, where the path curved inward and the trees thinned, he appeared, a silhouette, tall, lean, slower than I remembered. He walked like the road had cost him something, like every step was a confession. His shoulders carried more weight, his beard was fuller, his skin darker from sun, and his eyes, when they found me, were fire contained in reverence. I dropped the blanket from my shoulders without thinking. I took one step, then another, until I was running, bare feet hitting earth, heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't cry out. I didn't call his name. I didn't need to. He was already lifting his hand, palm open, face breaking into something that wasn't a smile but was far more tender. And when I reached him, when I stood just close enough to feel the heat of him, I didn't speak. I touched his chest, his jaw, his arms. I placed my hands on his face like I'd dreamed 100 times, and only then did I whisper, "Are you real?" His voice cracked. "I'm what's left of me, after you." And I broke. Not with sobs, not with drama. I fell into him like gravity had just remembered my name. He held me like he'd never let go again, like he'd spent every second imagining this exact weight, this shape, this breath. His arms trembled. Mine did too. I kissed his neck, his jaw, the scar above his brow. He pressed his mouth to my hair, my shoulder, my temple, not like a man hungry, like a man home. The children saw us from the window, first Lucas, then Emilia. They came slowly, cautiously, as if afraid the moment would disappear if they moved too fast. And when they reached us, Dante knelt, arms open, voice already shaking. "I missed you," he said. Lucas stopped just short of him. His eyes were searching, older. He looked at Dante the way a child looks at something that once saved them and might again. "You're not dead?" he asked, voice barely audible. Dante shook his head. "No, not anymore." Emilia ran to him then, crashing into his chest, sobbing into his collar. He held her so tightly I thought he might never let go. Lucas stepped forward slowly, then placed his hand on Dante's shoulder and whispered, "Welcome back." We walked back to the house together, the four of us, in silence. The wind stirred the trees. The sky held its breath. And every step felt like reclaiming something I thought we'd lost for good. Inside, he told us everything. Not all at once, in pieces, in pauses. He spoke of the hideouts, the chase, the last job that had to be finished so Ricardo would fall and not rise again. He spoke of faking his death, of burning everything that still bore his name, of watching from a distance, always one step away from running back. He cried once, when he said he didn't know if I'd still be waiting. I didn't cry. I just reached for his hand and held it like prayer. That night, we didn't touch out of desire. We lay in bed, face to face, knees brushing, our hands clasped between us. I listened to his breath, steadier now. I traced the curve of his mouth, the tiredness in his bones. And in that quiet, I said what I hadn't dared to until now. "I knew you'd come back." He turned his face slightly, pressed his lips to my wrist. "I came back," he whispered, "because you never let me leave." And when I finally closed my eyes, sleep found me like a blessing, because I no longer had to carry his ghost. He had returned, and this time I knew he was here to stay. The garden had never been quieter, not still, just quieter, as if the trees themselves were listening, as if the wind had learned to move more gently around us. I sat beneath the old sycamore tree with Emilia curled against my side and Lucas cross-legged in the grass, both of them drawing shapes into the dirt with sticks. Dante was nearby, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled up, building a small wooden frame with the kind of concentration usually reserved for war. It wasn't war, though. It was a playhouse. Emilia had asked for one the day after he returned. She said she wanted a castle, but a small one, something that smelled like wood and sounded like laughter. And he'd said yes, without hesitation, without looking at me for permission, as if he'd already decided that saying yes to her was the same thing as coming home. I watched his hands move, slow and steady, the way his jaw tightened with focus, the way his mouth softened every time Emilia offered her opinion about where the windows should go. He didn't argue. He adjusted. And I realized then how love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the way a man learns to listen. Sometimes it's the way he kneels in the dirt to give his daughter a roof she can call her own. Lucas had changed too. He followed Dante everywhere now, not with awe but with familiarity, as if part of him had always belonged to this version of the world, as if the quiet between them said more than words ever could. They didn't talk much, but I saw the way Lucas watched Dante's hands, the way he asked questions only when it mattered. And I saw the way Dante answered everyone, like it deserved his full attention. It made me ache, watching them, not from pain, from hope, from all the things I didn't know could grow back after so much had burned. That afternoon I stood at the edge of the garden, one hand on my belly. The days were changing, the air warmer, the light longer, and so was I. The curve of my stomach was no longer a secret. I hadn't told Dante yet. Not with words, I didn't need to. I saw the moment he knew, just 3 days after he returned. His hand had brushed against me beneath the sheets, and he'd paused, his breath catching, his eyes searching mine. I nodded. He closed his eyes, and that was all. We didn't speak of it right away. We didn't need to. The child already lived in the space between our hands, in the rhythm of our nights, in the soil beneath our feet. When I joined him by the playhouse, he looked up, sweat at his brow, dirt under his nails. He smiled, a slow, exhausted smile, and stood. I reached for his face, ran my thumb along the line of his cheek, felt the weight of what he'd built. Not just the house, not just the peace, but this moment. Us. She's going to remember this, I said, even when she's old. He nodded. So will I. I took his hand and placed it against my belly. The baby shifted. He froze, then exhaled like he'd been holding that breath since the day he left. Is it real? He asked. All of it, I whispered. We spent that night in the garden, the children asleep in their beds, the stars low and thick above us. We lay on the grass, his arm beneath my head, my leg draped over his, our hands joined above our chests, like a prayer. Do you think this will last? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. His fingers brushed the back of my hand. I think we'll fight for it, and that's what makes it last. The moonlight kissed his face, and I realized he looked younger now. Not because time had spared him, but because love had peeled something back, made room for softness. I used to think I had to die to deserve peace, he said, but maybe I just had to stop killing things to feel alive. I turned into his chest and held him, not like a woman desperate, not like a woman afraid, but like someone who had finally found a place to rest. The next morning, the playhouse was finished. Emilia named it Alma, without knowing, without prompting. She said it was because it felt like a heart, like something that breathed. Dante looked at me, eyes wide, and I nodded once, the name already resting inside me like a secret he had always belonged to. We didn't tell the children about the baby yet, but they knew, in the way they touched me more often, in the way Lucas asked if the new room would be for someone else, in the way Emilia kissed my stomach when she thought I wasn't looking. Everything was changing, slowly, gently, and we were letting it. That afternoon, we planted a tree, a young oak, thin and tall and full of promise. Lucas dug the hole. Dante placed the roots. Emilia patted the dirt with both hands like she was tucking in a blanket, and I watched from the porch, hand resting again where new life bloomed, feeling the weight of it all, light, rooted, eternal. When Dante joined me later, his hands covered in soil, his body tired, his face open, I leaned into him and whispered the words I hadn't said before. We're safe now. He looked out over the garden, at the tree, at the house, at the children laughing. For now, he said, and maybe that's enough. I took his hand and squeezed it. It is. Because sometimes peace doesn't come as a promise. It comes as a moment. And sometimes, if you hold it gently enough, it stays. The name came to me in the quiet, not in the labor, not in the hours of breath and blood and trembling that came before. It came after, when her skin was pressed to mine and her cry had softened into something more like music. The room was dim, the air thick with heat and heartbeat, and everything that makes a body feel holy again. Dante stood beside me, shirt stained, eyes wide, voice gone, one hand gripping my shoulder, the other still shaking. He hadn't spoken since she arrived. hadn't moved except to make space for her first breath, her first cry, her first look. I placed her gently into his arms, watched his fingers curl around her, awkward and reverent, as if he'd never held something so close to heaven. And maybe he hadn't. Maybe we both hadn't. Her eyes opened for a second, just one, and it was enough. "Her name is Alma," I whispered. He looked at me stunned, breath caught in his throat. "You knew?" I said. He nodded. "I felt it. The day she came to life inside you." I rested my head against the pillow, exhaustion wrapping around me like warmth. My body ached in ways I didn't have words for, but I didn't care. I was split open and full of something more than pain, full of her, of him, of us. The children came in the next morning. Emilia was barefoot, her nightgown twisted around her knees, her eyes wide with wonder. Lucas hovered behind her, quieter, older, but just as unsure. Dante lifted Alma carefully, gestured for them to come closer. Emilia gasped when she saw her, tiny and curled and blinking in the half-light. "She's so small," she whispered. "She'll grow," Dante said softly, his voice like something he'd saved just for this moment. Lucas stepped forward. "Is she ours?" Dante looked at him for a long time before answering. "She's all of ours." We spent that week in a hush, not from fear, from awe. Alma rarely cried. She made sounds like wind and light, like breath that hadn't decided what to become yet. I held her for hours, even when I was too tired, even when my body begged to rest, because every moment with her felt like a chance to rewrite the world. Dante changed in ways I didn't expect. He spoke softer, moved slower. He held Alma like she could disappear, kissed the top of her head before bed, watched her sleep with a stillness that could break you. He told her stories she wouldn't remember, whispered truths he didn't speak to anyone else. One night, I found him in the rocking chair, holding her against his chest, his eyes red. "I didn't think I'd get this far," he said. "I didn't think I'd live long enough to name her." I kissed the side of his face. "You're not naming her. She named you." One morning, weeks later, I stood by the window with Alma pressed against me, her heartbeat small and wild beneath her blanket. I looked out over the garden, the tree we planted, the playhouse Dante built, the swing that now held Emilia most afternoons. Lucas was teaching her how to throw a ball. He was patient, gentle, just like Dante. He came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, rested his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That we did it," I said. "We made it through." "Not all of it," he murmured, "but enough. We stayed there, breathing together, our daughter between us, our home around us." That evening, as the sun fell and the children slept, I wrote a letter, not to Dante, to myself, to the woman I had been when this all began, to the girl on the sidewalk, wet with rain, arms curled around two children, eyes hollowed out by survival. I wrote to her with tenderness, with pride. I told her she was brave, that she was not ruined, that the love she thought impossible would one day find her, not as rescue but as mirror. I told her that home wasn't a place, it was a person, and that person would look like danger, but feel like peace. I told her that one day she would name her daughter Alma, not because of loss, but because of everything they had saved. I signed it quietly, just my name, the name I had reclaimed, the name he now said with reverence, Mariana. When I looked up, Dante was in the doorway, Alma asleep in his arms, her breath tucked into the curve of his neck. "We're ready now," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For forever." And I believed him, because we were no longer hiding. We were choosing. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing love can be, a choice every day, no matter the past, no matter the scars, no matter the world. The letter was never meant to be read by anyone else. It wasn't written for the world. It wasn't shaped for eyes beyond his or mine, but somehow it found its way out, left on a cafe table beneath a cup that still held the heat of someone's solitude. A stranger picked it up, read the first few lines, and didn't stop. She carried it home, copied it word for word, shared it with a sister, a friend, a mother, and suddenly it was moving on its own, passed from hand to hand like a secret you whisper instead of shout. They called it a love story, but it wasn't. Not really. It was a story of survival, of rebuilding, of staying, of what it costs to hand your heart to someone who doesn't know if they can hold it without breaking it. It was about a woman who had nothing left and still opened the door when love knocked. Dirty, wounded, armed with silence. The letter didn't mention names. It didn't need to. It spoke in breath, in memory, in the kind of language only the heart recognizes. It told of a man who had been many things, powerful, feared, dangerous, and still chose to kneel in the garden and build a swing for a child who called him Tio. It told of a night when love didn't arrive in grand gestures, but in the quiet of someone who simply stayed. People read it and saw themselves, not in the mafia, not in the danger, but in the ache, in the want, in the waiting. They saw their own bruised hopes, their own second chances, and slowly the letter became more than a story. It became proof that you can be broken and still build, that you can lose everything and still find the thing that was meant only for you, that even ashes, if you love them right, can bloom. And somewhere, in a quiet house behind a garden gate, a woman read all the messages that had followed, messages from strangers, from women with shaking hands, from men who had walked away and didn't know how to return. And she smiled, not because it was hers anymore, but because someone else now believed in staying. The girl sat beneath the oak tree, with her knees pulled to her chest, sunlight warming the back of her neck, the wind tugging gently at the hem of her dress. She was 13, barefoot, a ribbon forgotten in her lap. Her hair was wild, her thoughts wilder. In her hands a folded page, worn, creased, the ink faded in places. She read aloud slowly, like the words mattered, because they did. The letter wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. But something in the rhythm of it, the way it breathed, the way it ached, made it feel like hers, like it had always been hers. Inside the house her mother watched through the window. Mariana. Hair longer now, eyes softer, a woman no longer chased by the past, only tethered to the present. In her hand, a mug of tea. In her chest, a heart that still stilled at the sight of her daughter's silhouette beneath that tree. Alma, named not for memory, but for everything they became after memory. Dante was in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, his body relaxed in that way that had taken years to learn. His hair was more silver now, his silence gentler. When he looked at Alma, his eyes held the same reverence they had the first time she opened hers. "She found it," he said quietly. Mariana nodded. She always would. They didn't move, didn't call out. They let her have the moment, the sun, the letter, the quiet inheritance of love that doesn't need to be explained. Alma finished reading and folded the page back into its soft shape. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply looked up at the sky as if the words had been written there all along. Then she stood, brushed the grass from her legs, and walked toward the house where love had taken root, where her story had been planted in silence and grown in truth. And as the wind stirred the trees, as the sun curved toward the horizon, the letter remained, unclaimed, unsigned, unforgettable. Because some stories don't need names, only hearts brave enough to believe them. Thank you, truly, for being here, for walking with me through every word, every breath, every silence between the lines. If you're still listening now, it means this story touched something inside you. And for that, I'm endlessly grateful. I want you to know how deeply I value your presence. Every time you leave a comment, even just a heart, it matters more than you know. It may seem like a small gesture, but each like, each share, each whisper of support helps this channel grow. It helps these stories find more hearts, more homes. It helps love travel further. So, if this story meant something to you, let me know. Your interaction keeps this space alive. It brings breath to what I create. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you, gently, warmly, to do it now, so you never miss the next story that might just hold something you didn't know you needed. With all my heart, thank you for listening. I'll be here always, telling stories that feel like whispers to the soul.